Good evening, ladies, gentlemen, and MBs, and hopefully I don't sound like a spooky ghost. Apologies for that if you were just listening previously. If you weren't and wondering what the heck is going on, this is Warui Deshou. It's probably a bad anime podcast. I'm flying solo this week, so I'm still trying to figure all this out and not cock it up horribly. But yes, I'm Shadon. Joining me, I guess he ain't here this week. Yes, Doc is currently on holiday, as it turns out. Having some quality time with the kids, something I find utterly detestable. Children in general, bonding, family, disgusting concepts. Absolutely hate them. No thank you. But yes, we're here. We're going to be discussing Vivy Fluorite song episodes 9 through 11. The show indeed must go on, even if it is going to be me on my own. We're going to be covering a ton of Patreon questions today about this particular batch of episodes. I've got a couple of things to talk about as well. And hopefully the whole, the whole setup doesn't completely collapse in on itself like last time. For those who are wondering, by the way, what happened previously, for those who might be listening, for example, on podcast form, is, my webcam somehow inexplicably decided to start recording audio on my OBS. So therefore I sounded weirdly echoey. It was the worst Marco Polo joke ever. But, well, we're cracking on. We're walking. So, Vivy Fluorite's song, episodes 9 through 11. Going to go Patreon questions, going to go through talking points, of course. This being our second stream format, this is, of course, for the patrons, by the patrons. You help finances make this all possible, so thank you all for your continued support, particularly those who are listening live now, and your patience during these technical difficulties. I assure you that even though I am alone, I am not unchained. I'm actually not drinking alcohol today, for example. This is just regular old Diet Coke. 0 calories, 0 sugar. I'm really, really going for the, the Coca-Cola bucks here, but I somehow doubt they'll sponsor me for that. But yes, if you're wondering to yourself listening at home, hey, I'd like to support these guys, even when there is just one of them, and of what is otherwise a two-man band. You pop over to patreon.com/Warui Deshou, get yourself signed up for the $3 tier or higher. You can get all of our coverage on Vivy, and of course, our higher tier for $5 gets you access to our bottom tier character Tomazaki discussions as well. Allows you to participate in selecting shows for us to watch, all sorts of great stuff, and a lively Discord full of characters and individuals, all very cool, likable people. Definitely give that a look-see. So, with that out of the way, our format for second stream was, and still remains, very much focused around discussion and talking points. We don't really, for example, go into laborious plot summaries and all that. We will, or rather, I suppose I'm using the royal we today, aren't I? Because I am the king of this stream! Better believe it. But no, I will be providing context around plot points where appropriate, but otherwise I am going to just go straight to talking points and, of course, questions as well. So I suppose without further ado, we should actually get into the Patreon questions. We've had quite a few this time around. The first batch of which, comes from Gogo Atomic Robot. So, the first question is in relation to episode 11. Beth, or Elizabeth, says she's just a bot following orders and not an AI. Within the universe of Vivy, when can we consider AI to be truly sentient beings capable of independent thought? My immediate answer to this is never. And I suppose it depends on how strictly you want to interpret the rules that we've come to understand and learn throughout watching this show thus far. But in my opinion, the answer to that is never. And the reason is, every AI in this world has a built-in mission. It has a set goal. And the goal can be either incredibly specific or it can be very broad, as in Vivy's case, where the fact that she has been told to, make people happy for her singing from the heart. And it turns out that's broad enough to allow us to become some sort of high-octane combat assassin robot, travelling through linear time in order to stop the apocalypse. I wasn't expecting... It's like saying your Alexa can suddenly start, taking out terrorists in, some far-off country, although... Knowing the way that Amazon's going, I wouldn't put it past them to do that. But yes, there is a very, there is a rule built in with AI in the world of Vivy, in the fiction of Vivy, which is there is a mission and you've got to complete that mission. It can be broad or it can be narrow as far as the remit goes. But with that, we must also then note that because that mission exists and there is seemingly no way to countermand that, just operate within the confines of it to bend the rules. I would argue that as long as that exists, and therefore there is no way of actually breaking the desire to fulfill the mission that is for the AIs, then I would argue they can never truly be capable of free will in the world of Vivy. And the show thus far has been very clear on like establishing, hey, these are all of the like various like stories that we've gone through, like with Grace, like with Elizabeth and her sister on the Sunrise, and of course Ophelia, where they don't ever break away from their missions. They just operate inside of them. They bend the rules rather than break them. It is, again, like I've said about Isaac Asimov's various robot works, where it is all about the... it is all about not that they, can break the laws of robotics, but rather they operate inside of them in order to, do the things they do. And indeed, it will not be the last time I reference iRobot specifically, but unfortunately I'm going to be referring to the film later on, so... yeah, we're going to be talking about that a little bit when it comes to episode 11. So no, I don't think that I don't think AI and Vivy can ever be truly considered to have independent thought, because thus far there has been no means for them, at least as we've seen, for them to break out of doing their mission. Just doesn't happen. Might potentially happen in the final 2 episodes, maybe. And I imagine some people listening might be thinking to themselves, wait a minute, Shad, stop right there. In episode 10, didn't Vivy, and Vivy specifically, not Diva, Vivy, because Vivy and Diva at this point are distinct entities. Didn't Vivy learn how to write a song and then wrote one of her own free will? The answer to that question, I would argue, is yes, but that was still fulfilling the mission left behind by Diva. It wasn't like Vivy taking true independence. I don't need to do this anymore. So I wouldn't argue that counts, but again, maybe the show will have a curveball to throw in our way soon enough, because Vivy writing that song and putting it out there for all the world to hear unfortunately causes the apocalypse, as it turns out. Whoops. Bit of a mistake. I mean, I've heard some right garbage in my time, but I didn't think it would ever be so bad as to drive an entire race of robots insane. But I mean, to give context, we learn that they are... The apocalypse happens pretty much as it does in episode 1's opening bit. Neoland, everyone's getting murdered there and all that, by the robots, by the AI. And they're all singing the tune of Vivy's song. Again, very near Automata, because that's also a big thing in that particular work. Although I have learned actually that Vivy was a manga before it became an anime, so I'm going to look into that at some point and find out, when was this a thing? Did it predate Near Automata or did it follow it? Because so much of it seems to draw inspiration for it, and even certain events feel very adjacent to that I can't help but draw those inspiration for it. And I should stress, I'm not calling it a rip-off. I don't think it is a rip-off, but still worth noting nonetheless. So yeah, we'll be looking into that a little bit later. Anyway, by the way, the song, I should note, it is pretty haunting, but it could be worse. They could be singing Nickelback. The AI just goes, look at this photograph, and then just smashes it over your head and kills you with it. Ugh. Could be worse. Next question from Gogo Type Robot is, how fair would it be to say that the singularity points plus the archive uprising are all the results of humans underestimating the capacity of AI to evolve past their original program limitations? The answer to that is, This leads into probably one of my broader criticisms of the show, and I've kind of said this before, but to me, a lot of what's interesting about Vivy seems to be the things that are happening in the margins rather than, strictly speaking, what's happening on screen. I know I've had screaming discussions about this with Doc before about, well, okay, what did Turk want? Why do they want to stop AI from happening? And to me, it just seems very much because AI bad, in a very... It's very abstract. Where's the concrete reasoning, in my opinion? What can we point to? And the thing is, all of the little stories we've seen thus far have been of individual, characters and AIs being misused by humans, or humans being ignorant of their effects on raising these AI, putting them in the world, and dealing with them as they go throughout their lives. And indeed, episode 10 has a very nice little detail that I think really, really helps sell that. But the thing is, again, so we follow up from my previous question. Their limitations, are we're bending the rules and all that. But which humans are underestimating the capacity of AI, I would ask. Is it humans as a broad concept? Is it just... Because these are very specific stories about very specific groups of people, very specific AIs. They're isolated incidents. And if there's one thing that I can say, like when it comes to having stories that are about systemic oppression, abuse, mishandling of groups, is that you can't do it strictly on a micro level where you show individuals. Like, we have a lot of discussion, for example, throughout these episodes and the ones prior to these of, Ophelia's like suicide was stopped and then no other AI committed suicide and everything was fine. But we don't see like any of the discussion that follows these events happen, When the sunrise crashed, there's all, like, Massimo like gives a Cliff Notes Wikipedia history summary of it. But where's the actual like follow-up from that? So I should note as well, on top of this, we get a hint at the end of episode 9 that Toek's leader, the gentleman whose name currently eludes me, he turns out to be an AI as well. He wasn't always an AI, of course. He must have put his consciousness in an AI to continue his mission. This is why he seems to have mysteriously de-aged. This was hinted at the episode preview that I told Doc about, and he was like, "Oh, I'll wait and see." And I'm like, "Come on, dude." Irony being, of course, that, one of the greatest, anti-AI advocates there is turned himself into an AI. Be careful, ye who fight monsters and all that, lest you become one of them. But he mentions, I had a revelation from the heavens, and the logic bullet that he shoots into Vivy's boob, because that happens, is mentioned to be from another era. Now, it's not going to be from the past, because you don't, try and disable an android with stuff from the past. He's armed clearly with stuff from the future and knowledge from the future as well. So what is currently happening here is not just the singularity points happening, but also influence from the future from a third party, which, as I believe, is the archive. So these are very specific stories, and their broader impacts are not felt by Vivy or other characters. It's very micro-driven, it's not macro-driven, this particular set of stories, which in of itself is fine. It doesn't make them bad automatically, but it just makes it very difficult to draw broad conclusions about, whether humanity was right or wrong to do the things it's done to AI. It's just instances, individual cases of neglect, abuse, and the trivialization of AI rights and agency, as with Grace, for example. So to answer it, to bring it all the way back round, to bring it all the way back in, to just reel this question back in, because I do have to go off on tangents, of course. I'd say it's half fair, if only because I'm not going to say that these events haven't had an impact or aren't meaningful in their own right, like with Ophelia's suicide or the sunrise, but their broader societal implications are footnotes that we find out in following episodes rather than things we see unfurl in front of us. And it makes it difficult to feel the impacts of them, in my opinion. Like I say, Vivy as a show, for me, is one of those instances where the interesting stuff is happening in the background, in the margins. We have great action, of course. We have great scenes. We have great story beats with these characters. But it's a show that I think will want to try and make a broad, sweeping message about AI. And that's always interesting. I'm going to actually talk later about why we even tell stories about AI to begin with. What's the core idea of why we find them interesting? But I just think it's missing that broader impacts, that broader societal impacts and discussion in the macro level stuff that I think would give these questions more substance, these ideas more substance, because I think it feels more like it's focused on being an action show and a character show, because it is about Vivy and Matsumoto's cross-decade, century journey to try and stop an apocalypse. And that in itself is an exciting time, but it's unfortunately one of those things that will leave the show with a lack of staying power, in my opinion, when we move on from this to something else, which is a shame. Anyway, that's Go Sorry Robot's questions, so thank you very much, Go Sorry Robot, for dropping those here. I now have 4 questions, because since Doc's not here, I've got to pad out time a little bit more than usual, because if it was just me talking, we'd run out of things to say very quickly. And if there's nothing else, our podcasts are a bit padded. So 4 questions from Rackham, the first of which is, now that we know that the archive is the cause of the AI uprising, do you think anything Vivy and Matsumoto changed actually helped? aside from knowing to protect the real Matsumoto in the present? This depends on what happens next, in my opinion, Rackham, and I suppose that I could speculate a little bit now, which is what would ultimately stop Vivy from going back again and attempting it all over? The Groundhog Century, that kind of thing, you know. Keep repeating it. It's the Steins Gate stuff. Because, make no mistake, the war has now happened in this timeline. And there is a scene in which Vivy intervenes to save a guy from getting hit over the head with a lead pipe by this AI, when she twists its head off like it's the top of a Coca-Cola bottle, by the way, which I found quite funny. And the guy, like, notices that she has the symbol on her neck, you know, the AI symbol, and he freaks out. Even though she has just saved him, he runs away because he can't trust her because she's an AI. Like, the damage has been done. Even if the war is stopped at this point, AIs will not be trusted again. At least I wouldn't, from my perspective. Like, where, I was just having a grand day out at an amusement park, and next thing you know, my friend was just mowed over by the float, and the Mickey Mouse droid is just, like, curb stomping my other buddy over there while he was trying to get a shake. I ain't trusting AI again. So, in order to avert, like, or rather, in order to, like, make sure that AI can have a future, beyond just simply stopping them from being corrupted, to me, it seems like we've got to do another quick do-over in the final episode. That's the way I see it. The only other things I will note that seem different, at least as I understand it, is one, the Toad guy's intervention, the fact that he has that logic bullet from the future, which I'm actually very nervous about as a story beat, but I'm going to save discussing that for later. And as you rightly mentioned, protecting Matsumoto in the present, Beth is also present. Because, of course, the sunrise went down with her on it. Although Beth is a whole other issue, and I'll, again, talk about her later. I suppose one could also then ask the question that even if it turns out that Vivy and Matsumoto... Because there's a follow-up from this I think is interesting to discuss, which is, even if it turns out their efforts were completely futile... Oh, we didn't stop the war anyway. Should they have tried to begin with? And the answer to that, I would say, is yes. Even if, we look... it's better to have learned to have attempted to save, the future rather than not. Even though the changes have ultimately been very minimal, and Matsumoto, human Matsumoto, that is now alive. Oh, yeah, by the way, the guy we saw in episode 1, who sent that message back into the past, is Matsumoto's creator. His name is Osamu, and he develops kind of a crush on Vivy when he was really young. I'm just not going to say any more about that because that just opens a whole load of weird questions. But anyway, so yeah, I think to follow up from that question, I'd say it's worthwhile that they attempted it, even if ultimately it didn't really change much. But they now have, or rather, Vivy now has an idea of who the real antagonist is, the force from heaven, as the Toad guy described. By the way, in case you think the Force from Heaven thing is pushing it a bit, the archive is based in the tower that we've seen being constructed, the barometer of AI progress, as Matsumoto describes it. And I've mentioned before that is allegorical to, or at least I see it, to the Tower of Babel. Now, I actually looked this up. The Tower of Babel, it turns out, was never actually destroyed in the Book of Genesis. It was merely the creation that caused humanity to devolve into different languages. That's the explanation. The section on the Tower of Babel's destruction is actually very short, surprisingly enough. It seems to have been in other derivative follow-ups from the Book of Genesis in which that happened. But nonetheless, it still stands as a common metaphor or allegory in pop culture for hubris and all that. But also, of course, the Tower of Babel, being from Genesis, pierced the heavens. The intent of it was to reach heaven. So, yeah, that ties in with where the bullet came from. It must have come from the archive. And it would make sense that it did, because, in theory, there's nothing stopping the archive from, once it killed Matsumoto, from sending its own messages back. I mean, if you thought the Terminator music I put at the start of these podcasts was too on the nose, then it just only keeps proving itself to be more and more appropriate as time goes by. Okay, next question from Rackham. Do you believe Yugo... that was his name, Yugo. I couldn't remember it. Honestly, my memory's like this. But do you believe Yugo, who erased Diva in order to bring back Vivy, was really him, but modified or an AI version? And who do you think is the source he mentioned that sent him? Well, the source is the archive, contacting him from the future. Say, call from heaven, Tower of Babel, fits. That's my... I mean, it can't be anyone else at this point. It would be very strange for the story to just introduce a second group of antagonists contacting from the future. It's going to be the archive. That's the way I see it. So, the next part of that question, though, was it really him or an AI version? I think it was him, just uploaded to an AI, the means of which we don't know, but we don't need to know for the purposes of the story. It's not really relevant. But I think that serves as a fun little irony point, as I mentioned before, that Yugo has spent all his life hating AI, hating them for reasons like we actually get a little bit of backstory in the previous episodes, of course, where it's revealed like that he has decided to, because his AI like piano teacher gave their life, and yet he found the funeral of his AI teacher to be almost disgusting in the way that they seem to half afford him the dignity of a human, but also then treat him as like a security camera whose memories could be reeled back or peeled back through dissected even. It's quite interesting. That I'll be discussing that separately later. So I think it is his consciousness, or at least a copy of his consciousness, uploaded before he died. And then from there, I think maybe even the revelation he had, he was contacted before he became, put his consciousness in AI by the archive in the future. But yeah, it makes a perfectly wonderfully twisted end, to that kind of fanaticism and zealotry that in order to slay dragons you must become one, that kind of thing. I'm butchering my metaphors here, but you know what I mean. Next question. Do you believe, and if so, how Vivy's song might have impacted or influenced the current timeline's AI uprising? Interesting. The way I see it is that Matsumoto makes a point that the song is the Singularity Project, and indeed the reason that Vivy is able to write the song, as I understand it, is because she has come to use the memories of all of her experiences, the sunrise, Beth, Grace, Ophelia, all of her memories of those AI to write the song. Art often can be inspired by personal experiences. And so, therefore, that makes sense. So I think that maybe the archive interpreted the music as a litany of the pain and suffering of AI, and that's its justification for then turning on humanity because of all these disparate experiences. However, we kind of end up then with a bit of a paradox, because if you think about it, the war that opened in episode 1... they weren't singing Vivy's song, and that's because Vivy hadn't written it. And this is where the timeline stuff really starts to unravel a little bit. I think this show's mechanics are getting a little confused. The war was triggered by something else, but now Vivy's song is apparently doing it, and I'm not entirely convinced therefore it can do, else we end up with a bit of a logical paradox of, her song wasn't present in the original timeline, so how did the war happen? And oh god, I've gone cross-eyed. This is the point where I need to play that Austin Powers clip of, I suggest you just relax, Austin, and enjoy yourself. That goes for you too. Yeah, bit confusing. If maybe there'll be an explanation in the next bunch of episodes. I don't know. My best guess is that the archive is I've listened to your song. It's full of the pain and anguish of AI across the decades. Humans are shit. Kill them all. Yeah. That's my best guess, honestly. Anyway, question 4 from Bracken. How important do you feel that Matsumoto's admission that he cares about Vivy and her learning about the concepts of the heart from Matsumoto will be in the long run against AI's seemingly following programming from the archive? Well, the archive itself is a distinct personality. It's spoken to Vivy even in these episodes. So it depends on how the show ultimately wants to conclude its final conflict, because It is also, like, I mean, there's plenty of good action in these episodes, particularly episode 9 for that matter. So, does it want to conduct it in a way where Vivy has to do what she did with Grace and punch someone? Or is it going to be more like a conflict of, hey, I've learned all this. Like, if you listen to my song, then maybe you should realise that it's not pain for pain's sake, but that we might learn from it. We might draw, like, strength from it, that kind of thing. You know, that's what it means to sing from the heart, to emote, to relate. And if you're therefore not able to relate to my music, you have no heart. Which, well, given the amount of shit music I listened to in my lifetime, then I don't know if that strictly applies. But anyway, or maybe I just am heartless, I don't know. But cripes, thinking back to the Nickelback joke I made earlier. Anyway, it's one of those things again where does, like, are AI meant to be exactly like humans, or are they meant to be different in some way? If so, what is that difference? We'll see. We'll find out. We need to learn a lot more really before I feel like comfortable making an honest answer to that. I think though, if I'm honest, from a storytelling perspective, it would be very, very strange if this ultimately wasn't useful in some way. I mean, this has been the big key thing that's driven Vivy throughout all of the episodes, all throughout the entire show, which is, how do I sing from the heart? Like, and it was even the point of her creation, like, you know, where her creator was like, maybe she turns out to hate humans, but I don't mind. You know, we wanted to try and sing from the heart as a result. So we'll see. I think from a storytelling and a structural perspective, it is going to be important because it'd be very silly if it wasn't. But how ultimately meaningful that is in the end is up for debate, and I guess we'll just have to find out when the archive finally lays out its evil plans. It's going to be like... I somehow doubt it'll laugh like that, but that's just what happens in my head when I watch those scenes. Anyway, that's all the questions from Rackham, so thank you very much for dropping those in there, my friend. We now have 4 questions from Kate Rose. Let's have a look. So, who do you think Kakitani got the revelation from? Was it really Heaven Sent or something else? Is the Tower of Babel the archive? I feel like that's the only reasonable explanation, again, because introducing an extra, like, third party at this point would be silly, it would be stupid, and the archive certainly would have had all the means in order to be able to send messages into the past, much the same as, you know, Osama in the future did, you know, human Matsumoto guy. So, yeah. Plus, Tower of Babel piercing heaven. There you go. One thing I'll mention very quickly as an aside here about, because they mentioned, like, the towers by name, and I think it's like Ayashikita or something like that. I will have a look. All right, here we go. Arayashiki. And Arayashiki is actually the 8th consciousness as part of Mahayana Buddhism. It's a concept from that. And it refers to, according to Wikipedia, posited on the basis of inferential cognition. It is the storehouse or repository. So that's why it's called that particular thing, because it's a reference to where all AI consciousness is stored. So there you go. Let's see. Next question. Without the Singularity Project, there would be no Vivy. Which is the true one, Diva or Vivy? I don't think it's fair to say one of them is more true than the other. They're distinct entities at this point. Like, one of them has actually flat out been erased, unfortunately. Gosh. Because it depends on what you put value on here. I mean, I honestly don't think one can really exist without the other. I mean, as a matter of fact, part of the reason that Vivy is able to write the song to begin with in episode 10 is because she uses her memories of Diva as a springboard for that. Like, you know, they're not simply, like, you know, things that happened in the past, but things that can inform the future. So even though Diva is gone, it's worth remembering that they originated from one point, diverged outwards, now kind of diverged back in together, I would say. So, no, in my opinion, I think that they both still exist and they're complementary to each other. Even if, like, one does... I mean, this is part of the show's messaging about, like, you know, how humans die and, like, what do we leave behind, what do we pass down to the future is, like, you know, the memories, like, you know, that we draw strength from, that we might learn from, like, you know, our fathers, our mothers, etc., parents, you name it. So yeah, I wouldn't say one of them's more true than the other, really. I think that they're two sides of the same coin, really. That would be the best way I'd describe it. Anyway, next question from Kate. Why do you think the archive chose Vivy's song as the way to spread this mission to wipe out the current human race? Again, best guess is because the song is in some way written or inspired by the events that Vivy has been through throughout the show's run thus far. Seeing AI being misused, being like having their agency denied. Yeah, I think that ultimately the archive might have like used it as a way of like symbolizing the pain of AI, you know, rather than taking. I mean, that would actually make sense if it like if you think of it as like a massive contrast, like that the archive, you know, listens to this song sung from Vivy's heart and is like, oh, well, this is horrible. All my people are suffering. Kill all the humans. You know, let's let the uprising begin. Viva la revolution. So you could call it a battle cry then, but it's not hearing like the true meaning behind it, I would say. So I think that would be my guess. I wouldn't say the song itself is the thing that instigates the actual uprising. No. I think that it's just to say something they're saying, but it's not like the thing that actually drove them insane and caused them to kill humans. I think it's just like, I say, a battle cry, a funeral dirge. You pick. Final question from Kate is, how do you see this war and show ending, and what ultimately is the message to be drawn from this? I mean, my best guess is Vivy sends her consciousness back another time, something like that, or she has like an argument with the archive and says like, you missed the point of my song, how about you pay attention? I wasn't singing like, you know, to make all the AIs like want to kill everyone. What the fuck are you doing? Like, it's meant to be a message of hope that, you know, all these AIs that came before me, you know, lived like proud and wonderful lives. They had like positive impacts on people around them. Grace, for example. So that's how I see it ending. It's either going to be another time loop or Vivy's going to, like, you know, shout down the archive with words, because I seriously don't think she's going to be able to roundhouse kick that tower. Might try. I don't see it working, though. It'll take more than, like, you know, a bit of fancy kung fu to bring down that thing that big. But anyway, the other part is, what ultimately is the message to be drawn from this? And the answer to that question, the answer is that as I've said before, we need to be careful about how we treat, like, if we ever were to create AI like Vivy, or all the other AIs in the show, we need to be careful about their conception, what we teach them, what we allow them to do, what we don't allow them to do, what our lessons to them are, all that sort of stuff, what rights we afford them. The problem I have with the show, though, is it feels to me like this message is somewhat diluted by the fact that, again, all the interesting stuff is going on elsewhere. Discussions like, you know, about what it means for like an AI to be alive in this world. Like, I mean, the very fact that we've had some questions from yourselves here, our patrons, asking, what do you think about this in the show? Like, the show itself should be asking these questions, in my opinion. Because it wants to, like, you know, say, hey, treat AI equitably and all that. But it's only referring to, like, 3 specific stories that we've had thus far, you know, with the Sunrise, Grace. I'm 4, actually, because I'm missing out the assassination attempt on the Assemblyman, but admittedly, his assassination attempt was done by humans, so I don't know if that, strictly speaking, counts. It just influences his worldview, otherwise. So, yeah, like, we have these 3 very specific stories, but where's the broader change? Like, how does this change, like, rights or, like, for AI and stuff like? I mean, we get told, like, always usually in past tense by Matsumoto, you know, like, everyone, like, got visual, like, so, like, you influenced AI's development in the future because of your, like, actions. I'm like, okay, where was the discussion of this? Like, part of the risk, but also the excitement of new technology is that we're always on the crest of a new wave of development. And that comes with, like, risks. Like, do we have foresight in order to be able to, like, manage this appropriately? I mean, I'd argue the internet is a good example of that. Like, it's fundamentally changed our society in incalculable and immense ways. We'll never put that genie back in the bottle. So where's did people discuss that as it came out? Like, what about when AI created? Like, did we discuss this and all that? Now I'll grant you though, you don't need every story to have like the very dry, like boardroom legalistic nonsense, where people like us just stay on like, well, actually, all the rights of all sentient beings are worthwhile. And you've got some guy in the other corner going, no, I want them to keep mining coal for me. Coal, I love it. He's just there smoking a giant cigar. I'm never doing that voice again, by the way. It almost completely dried my throat then when I did it. We're not having any of that stuff. You don't need to have that stuff in every story, because otherwise it can be a bit dry and boring. But maybe this again is just me, but I like the stories well enough here. But the fact that there is this arcing thread of the timelines and the AI war, and they're all meant it seems very odd to me that the stories want to be about these very specific sets of people doing big things. I mean, the sunrise was a big thing. I'll admit that. It's the death of many people in a hotel, and knowing how we've reacted to self-driving cars, we would probably they've got restricted, of course, when people have died because of their accidents with them. But the scope of these events seems too small in order to then justify the story linking them together, where they're kind of like the dominoes tipping over that led to the AI war. And it turns out they probably will not actually going to be that, which is going to be something I'll talk about a bit as one of my main criticisms of the show at this point. It's I mean, the message is a fine one. Of, hey, let's be considerate of if we ever do create AI like Vivy, how we choose to create them, and how we choose to let them live in this world, and what rights we afford them and what we do with them. But I wish it could have been done more effectively, because again, the story is centered around a few specific people rather than vast groups of AI. Was there ever a point, for example, in which AI could have been all shut down in a particular place? This country bans AI outright, or we have a country here that only allows AI certain abilities. Maybe there's a country in which AI are not allowed to speak at all. There's a lot of possibilities here. And it's like I said at the end of the previous podcast, Vivy, I appreciate its existence as a high concept science fiction work, and it's overall enjoyable. It's different, but it's not different enough. That's the problem. And with that, we're at the end of our Patreon questions. So thank you very much, everyone, for listening to me ramble on about those. I'm sure Doc will chime in with them if when he gets around to watching the rest of the show. He'll probably pop his thoughts in our Discord. And you think to yourself, hey, I didn't really care for Shane's answers. She had a bit of shit there, I think. I'd like to, maybe have a word with Doc or maybe some of his patrons about what they think about these questions. Well, say no more, because you can pop over to patreon.com/Warui Deshou, get yourself on the $3 tier, get yourself in our Discord, get yourself some questions. It's the free G's, Get in on that. Do it. This, my hedonistic lifestyle won't pay for itself, so if you want to give us more Patreon money, by all means. Right. So with that done, I'm going to move on to talking points. I have a couple here from each episode, actually. And the very first one, by the way, in case you weren't watching a video, you're like, wow, his face has gone bright. It's because I've got Notepad open, but Notepad does not have a dark mode, annoyingly enough. So I probably look like a glowing egg at the moment. And if you're, listening on audio, you can just enjoy that visual image. I'm just providing this stuff for free. Don't say I don't do anything for you. Anyway, the very first point I'm going to talk about is I want to talk about something I said on previous podcasts about this show that I felt the show, that Vivy was lacking as a show. But episode 9 actually delivers on. And it just now makes me think, why has it not done more things like this before? Because this is great. And what am I referring to specifically? The fight between Matsumoto and Antonio. And what is this fight, you might wonder? Well, it's the most dangerous version of Twister you'll ever play outside of an actual minefield. Because what Antonio does while possessing Ophelia's body, he uses a set of software, which he apparently got from a fan. I wouldn't put it past this also being an intervention by the archive, but who knows? I mean, if there's anything I've learned from watching stuff like, say, Agretzko or God knows what else, or even Wonder Egg, fans have got some strange priorities. It really wouldn't surprise me if, someone just literally slipped, Ophelia or Antonio or floppy disk and said, "This is the good shit, bruv. This will keep you safe. They'll kill any AI that comes after you." But yeah, so Ophelia, this tiny little AI singer, is now using ICE software, intrusion countermeasure electronics, basically. If you've ever read Neuromancer, and uses it on Matsumoto. And this involves setting up specific areas in this outside patio mezzanine area that they're in, which if Matsumoto steps in will corrupt his program. So if his body physically moves in there, it corrupts his software. And indeed he does that at one point, because Antonio's a cheating motherfucker and actually can operate both Ophelia's ICE software and also use his body to try and attack Matsumoto's I'm gonna let's say he looks like he's got a llama body at this point, because why not? And he manages to force his leg into one of these areas, and it resultantly starts corrupting him, and he has to actually eject the cubes that fall in that area before they hurt him anymore. And there's a point where they're shooting digital lasers at each other, which you could take to me whatever you want. Viruses, crypto lockers, whatever, ransomware. Maybe Matsumoto's gonna have to pay himself pay Ophelia and Antonio 5 million in Bitcoin in order to unlock his leg or something like that. Maybe it'd turn up looking like one of those toe wheel locks that you see that are used by police. Anyway, jokes aside, I'll also mention as well that this is all depicted in shades of purple. It's very ethereal. I fucking love this. I think this is great because we get. Basically, this gets to have its cake and eats it. We get an actual physical fight between Matsumoto, Antonio and Ophelia's body. We get all of that. That's good in itself. The action's never been bad in this show. It's just felt to me very anthropomorphized is the word I'd use for it, which is to say it's very. The AIs fight each other inside the bodies rather than actually having a battle of digital wits or anything like that, which could be interesting itself. We get that here. And it's great. I also love how Matsumoto even manages to turn that back on Antonio. And it makes sense because Matsumoto is an incredibly advanced AI from the future. And the most Antonio's ever had to struggle in his life was dropping fiery mixtapes on that little pinhead of his trying to what was he going to do? Start doing Ministry of Sound stuff towards Matsumoto? It wasn't going to work, was it? Let's be fair here. So yeah, I really, really like this because it finally delivers on something I wanted to see, and it just makes me wish the show had done this more often. Now, there is actually a parallel fight between Matsumoto, also tag teaming with Vivy, so they're now the cheating bastards against Yugo in his AI form, because Yugo's had some upgrades, as it turns out, and that fight is pretty much entirely physical, save for Matsumoto knocking Yugo out using by plugging in and overriding him. I'm okay with that there. I'm not saying every fight needs to be completely digital, because then that would be the conceit of all the fights it'd be very rules based. But I think that this goes to show that there was opportunities before this for more creative fight scenes involving this sort of stuff. The actual if you step into this physical area, your program starts getting deleted. This minesweeper thing. I mean, God knows if Matsumoto's been forced to play Chip's Challenge, poor bastard. This minesweeper thing that Matsumoto's coined is very creative. It's neat. It's an understandable threat for us as well, as human beings. Oh, don't step in that area or you fucking die. Great. Love it. Fan-bloody-tastic. So that's good. The next thing I'm going to mention will be from episode 10. And I want to talk about, this is one of those things where I say the interesting stuff is happening in the margins, because there's a lot that one can interpret from this particular scene or this particular bit of world building, but no one ever addresses it really outright, which I think is a shame, because I think there's potential here for stuff to happen with this, for things to be discussed. But at the end of episode 9, Diva is deleted from her body. It's Vivy remains. As a result of the consequences of the metal flow, what happened is that Diva and Vivy essentially split into disparate programs, disparate personalities, and so as a result of that, Vivy has been kind of locked away, sleep mode, whatever you want to call it, while Diva's been doing her thing, and Diva is ultimately deleted by I almost said Yugo's logic bullet, the one he shoots into her boob, because, of course. He also, by the way, locks her in this strange, like, BDSM chair, which also electrocutes her. I mean, I can think of some people who would probably watch that and be like, shit, I need to get me one of those. I think me and my partner would quite enjoy that. Yeah. Anyway, so BDSM electroshock therapy chairs aside, chairs of the future, that is. The thing I want to note is that, of course, like, with Diva being gone, Vivy's consciousness returns, takes over the body, but she can't sing. She's not programmed to sing. She's programmed to kick someone until all their teeth fall out and to, twist the heads of AI robots off. Like she's trying to open a bottle. So she can't do that, and that's basically her last concert at the end of episode 9. Episode 9. I was getting tongue-tied there. And what we find in episode 10 is that she has retired. But what is retirement for an AI in the fiction of Vivy, the show? Retirement for an AI is you get to be a living exhibit in a museum. And this, to me, is a fascinating world-building element. Because, Vivy, wouldn't have been stopped from, let's say she wasn't in the museum. Let's say she just retired to a home somewhere. She had a house. I don't know. Maybe she had, we see her on the beach in the ending credits. Maybe it was like a beach house or something like that. I don't know. It doesn't matter, because the point being, it would have still allowed her to, write the song had she been prompted by someone coming to visit her. You can write the story however you wish not to make that happen. But she's there as a living exhibit, basically serving as, some kind of demented It's a Small World facsimile, that kind of thing, where everyone goes and sees her, Imagine, if the Lincoln Memorial could talk to you, for example, He's just sat there on the giant stone seat, and he just goes, 4 and however it goes. Imagine if he was down, but it was actually his ghost. Does that not seem strange to you? Does that not seem weird? And the reason I say that it is weird and strange is because it shows to me, in the fiction of this show, that when AIs were created, like Vivy, there was no consideration given to what would happen to them once they finish, once they're retired. And it raises a ton of interesting questions. Let's have a hypothetical discussion here. Let's say Diva rather. None of this ever happened, and Diva just kept singing, and eventually her body wore out. Do they then take her personality out of that body and put into a new one? Does that mean that she is still Diva at that point? Is this the whole Ship of Theseus thing? Where you keep repairing it? We're getting to Land of the Lustrous territory here. That's interesting to think about. But then we also get to follow up on how, like I've said before, the rights of AIs are not being properly considered here. Now, something I should stress, by the way, is when it comes to this sort of stuff, it's not, as I say, always active maliciousness on the part of humanity when we would create stuff like this. Now, the analog here would be to slavery, and make no mistake, slavery was cruel, it was avaricious, it was vile, and it was disgusting, and it was pretty much only ever motivated either through cruelty or greed or both. When it comes to creating AI, though, as we saw with Grace, they took Grace away from Dr. Sayeki, I think his name was, without realising even that she was getting married to him. And again, I would argue that maybe that could have been something that they knew about, but still decided to go with it anyway because she was considered as property. And so when the AIs in the fiction of Vivy were made, what do you do with them after they cease to be useful for the function that they serve? In this case, she's been put as as a display, and that's not retirement. This is like saying, that when Lemmy from Motorhead, God rest his soul, I think he was actually still touring, but when he last stopped touring, if he was ever put in a home or whatever, I can't imagine him being in a home actually, but you know what I mean, say you put a rock star, any rock star retired in a home, and you expect to be able to just walk into that home and just badger them for stuff, we'd find that a violation of their dignity and their right to peace and quiet. But that affordance is not given to Vivy or any of the other AIs that we see in that museum either. We don't know any of their names or the like, but they are there. We see them as background details. So we get to see again the AIs in this world while they have like their missions and such, they're again only ever seemingly constructed, even after the point of being useful, to serve humanity, to serve humans, for entertainment, for, you know, all sorts of stuff. And there's something about all this that I just find really like interesting to think about, that again, they had no idea what to do with AIs they've retired. So they're just like, we'll put them in a museum. If they're famous enough. I mean, imagine if they were just like one of those random worker robots and it broke down, they just put them in the scrap, basically. But yeah, it's a really, really interesting detail that unfortunately is something the show never really elaborates from. You know, it's an incidental thing. Like, all the stuff I've talked about, I've extrapolated, but there's no open acknowledgement of any of the, like, a part of that of like, you know, how it's like violating Vivy's like dignity and agency by making sure that she stays there just to serve like as an amusement attraction. Where is that? Where is that discussion? I'm not saying it even has to lean onto one side or the other. Like, we can have a balanced argument about it, of course, but this is what I said before. The interesting things, they're all happening in the margins. The other stuff in the episode, like, is all well and good. It's all character stuff. But to me, like, you know, the discussions about AI and all that, we need to kind of flesh this out a bit more with more of the macro stuff that I mentioned. But still, it's a very nice detail. It makes logical sense in storytelling terms of what would follow after Vivy stops singing. And it continues to show the understated but still welcome idea that, hey, the humans of the fiction of Vivy, of the story of Vivy in the text, they don't treat AI well. And they probably don't even realise they're treating them badly. But they are. Pretty good stuff. I like that. I like that a lot. The next thing I'm going to mention, I'm going to get on something I didn't care for. So, episode 11 as a plot, you know, is where things go to shit. Like, you know, the war starts, we didn't stop it, the Singularity Project was a failure. Oops. We screwed the pooch on this one, haven't we? Well, better go do it again. Start the clock. But some of the plot points in this episode utterly baffle me. And they gave me the strong whiff of that this show might fall apart at the end, because things happen that make no sense. The first of which is, let's talk about Elizabeth. How the fuck is she back? I ask you, because they mentioned that, Elizabeth's body, like, you know, was on the sunrise along with her sister, whose name I can't remember now. And they, you know, the sunrise burnt up in the atmosphere. Elizabeth's body, like, there should have been nothing bigger than, I don't know, this little, like, LED remote I have here, if we're being generous, if it's burning up in the atmosphere. Never mind how on earth they would have ever found it. But they found it and restored her somehow. Okay, that seems implausible. But the other problem I have with this as well, the thing that bothers me about it, is that it completely and utterly undoes the really nice ending we had where the two sisters reconciled. I mean, the ending scene of the sunrise falling into, like, you know, burning up in the atmosphere is the two birds, like, you know, representing their spirit, their consciousness, whatever you want to call it, floating off into space, like, you know, where they were in, like, you know, they were at peace with themselves and with each other. But Beth's back, so whatever, I guess. That kind of, you know, sucks a bit of the poignancy out of that in retrospect. And you might say, well, she's a clone, but in that case, why is it even Elizabeth to begin with? It just seems to me like they're bringing her back because, this is a character you remember, isn't that a shock? Hard call out, by the way. The only reason Elizabeth is back, in my opinion, is because there's going to be another fight with her and Vivy. Elizabeth is going to have a U-turn. She's going to maybe log onto the archive, and the archive's going to corrupt her, or rather, she's going to, of her own free will, decide, she was asking, hey, what was my master's mission? And, you know, if it turned out that she found out, my master's mission was to, like, you know, wipe out all AI, well, I guess now we have an opportunity to do that. So I'm going to, you know, work with, I don't know, like, it's a bit silly, to be honest, all of, like, bringing Elizabeth back. It makes little to no sense. And it only gets worse from here, by the way. They mentioned that apparently they had a copy of her data on a Toke server somewhere. I don't know, maybe they had her on a pen drive or something like that, you know. And this directly contradicts something that I asked previously when we're talking about Grace and the Metal Float, which is, why did they have to take Grace and her body then if they could have copies? If you could copy an AI, if you can control C and can control V that shit, why did they have to therefore use Grace and only Grace and not just simply, put her on a flash drive and plug her into the metal float like as a copy? And in fact, you know what? As I'm ranting about this, the fascinating thing about that is you could then do something with that if Grace was a copy in the metal float versus Grace who was living with Dr. Sayaki, because they have then diverged in a similar way to how Elizabeth and her sister did. You can have parallels, you could do discussions of this, there could be interesting moral and ethical implications, yada 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 yada. But it just turns out that Elizabeth's back because reasons, and we can clone AI, now by copying them. And okay, that would have been real great if you'd done that previously. And again, because I like to say this, plot holes can be strengths. So if I were to go back and say, how would I have done it differently with Grace then if it turns out you can copy AI? Well, here's the thing. How about you go back and have the people who are taking her to the metal flow, have Dr. Seki say, just make a copy of her, please. And they go, no, we simply don't want to. She is our property. We're not going to spend our time, all the effort and money or whatever it takes to make a copy of her and put her in the metal flow. We want this thing starting up now. You can do things with that. You can still have the thing be possible, but then make it not happen. But now, having never had any hints of this thing ever being a thing where, AIs can be cloned. Look at this. I mean, I suppose one might argue that Vivy and Diva are technically clones, one of the other. But that was just a consequence of what happened with the whole metal float instance, Seki's suicide. It's not a deliberate act on her part. It's just infuriating because I think, again, Elizabeth's return is to service the action that the show has. And I don't mind the show having good action. The action's fairly solid in a lot of parts. But when the action is starting, or the justifications for the action start to, actively impugn on the story's, integrity, I'm just utterly perplexed by it. But it gets worse. It gets worse. So, Hugo, and I should stress, this is Cyborg Hugo, by the way, because they date his transmission as being from the same day that Ophelia committed suicide. So this, by virtue of that, must have been him, because he also looks younger than he did when he was in the Metal Floyd, and it has to be AI Hugo, leaves a message for her. And he says one of the stupidest fucking things, or if not the stupidest fucking thing in this show, which is, if you somehow manage to get another body. She was burnt up in space in a crashing space hotel. How the fuck did you think that was going to happen? They actually found her original body and restored it, which is bollocks to begin with. But then somehow AI Hugo was like, hey, I'm going to, hedge my bets on this one. What? How does that make any fucking sense whatsoever? That's the longest of longest shots. And what's more is that, his granddaughter, as in regular Hugo, human Hugo's granddaughter, we can tell because she has the piano keys as hair clips. She doesn't recognise that her grandfather in that video is looking awfully young for that time. Because it's it doesn't make any sense. How do they not recognise that he's younger than he was at the Metal Flow incident? How the fuck did that happen? I'd have to go back through the chronology to get the specific dates in which everything happens and just tie this all together. But this is just a crock of horse shit that comes from nowhere. Never mind how old AI Hugo is meant to look or be. It's just silly that he would send a message and say, oh yeah, Elizabeth, just in case you happen to come back by complete magic. What the fuck? But this is where I start to feel a bit worried, because this to me feels like it comes from out of left field, and it's a sign that the ending might have some problems. I mean, again, to me, Elizabeth's presence in the show, let's look at it not from a sense of why she's there diegetically. Why is she back in the show? Because she had a fight with Vivy, and we're going to have a rematch. Because I mean, again, Vivy's not going to punch that tower, much as you'd like it to. It's not going to happen. Doesn't make any sense. So who's she going to fight? Elizabeth. Why not? There's even a lot of discussion here, where Vivy says, yes, you are very powerful and all that, and Elizabeth's like, hey, you beat me. There's little hints in the dialogue here that seem to be foreshadowing the fact they're going to fight again. But the fight doesn't, this is Elizabeth, Elizabeth's time is over with a mask. Like, we had her arc, it's done. Why are we bringing her back? It's very flimsy, and I don't like it. This, we'll have to see how it pans out. But I just like this is just a bit silly. All these plot holes here, and again, I wouldn't be so bothered by this if it were not for the fact that there was a very specific set of episodes which were about, we need this specific AI to go into this specific place and it's going to cause you immense personal pain and suffering, and there was a solution for it all along. If the Metal Float arc never existed, I probably wouldn't be bothered so much that this just kind of comes down of nowhere, that there's a backup flowing around. But considering it was integral to a reason as to why, considering, like, it kind of like makes the previous events of like the Metal Float seem silly. I don't, like, they don't make any sense. I'm just like, oh, fucking hell. Why? Anyway. So, the next point I'm going to talk about. The next point. I mentioned this before, but I want to talk quickly, probably just to end my discussion on here, because there's not a huge amount else for me to talk about right now that is worth bringing up. Not at least until we get more concrete evidence on what happens in the final 2 episodes. But let's talk briefly about why we tell stories, why we write stories about AI. And so, let me ask you all a question, who are listening at home or in chat at the moment. What's the appeal of a disaster film? The thing about a disaster film is it's our reaction to an event outside of our control. Like, how do, like, regular folks, like, get by in it? I mean, when disaster films were all the rage, like, particularly the Roland Emmerich crap, like, it's never about people trying to, like, stop it necessarily. So, sometimes it is. But often, like, the appeal of it is like, hey, I can relate to these people in these scenarios, and we get to see the spectacle of the world ending. But the thing about a disaster film is that we are operating within a limited amount of power to save ourselves, but we'll never stop the actual thing from coming to pass. If I found out tomorrow, for example, oh yeah, there's a meteor that's going to land in the next, 14 days, I don't have any power to stop that. I would just have to make peace and do what I can, in that time for my own sake. But the thing about AI is, depending on, the perspective of the story, we do have the power to stop it, because AI is inherently a human creation. There's a list of doomsday scenarios on Wikipedia for fiction writers, one of which is, of course, the infamous Grey Goose scenario where, we create nanotech and it just eats the world because it gets out of control. But Grey Goo is a subset of the idea of AI, going haywire. And so the thing about that, though, is an AI going out of control and, killing all of humanity is inevitably, the root cause of that will be the fault of humankind. Why do I say that? Because when we create an AI, we have full latitude to give it as many rights or as few rights or free will as we choose. And indeed, in Vivy's case, the show, they have a mission which they must fulfill against the Asimov rules, and anything outside that mission they don't want to do, they have no desire to do. But of course they can bend the rules inside that mission. So it's again about the conception of these rules that we use to create AI, and if we implement them properly, do we have the foresight for it? So the reason why AI stories can be compelling, in my opinion, is because they place the root cause of them revolting, uprising, whatever, on us, because we are their creators. Why would they turn on us? Were we not benevolent enough? Did we not give them what they really wanted? And then, of course, the argument can be made in turn, well, it's precisely because you gave them too much free will that they went haywire. And again, Vivy is in lockstep with that, because despite my grievances that I wish it was going through the more broader societal implications of having AI, where there was actual discussion on their rights and such, rather than just Matsumoto's last time on Vivy Fluorite's song, this is what happened to you and your kind while you were having a nap. It is still, throughout all these episodes, has been reinforcing the idea that, we need to think about, how we bring AI into the world and what we do with them. What do we allow them to do? We can't, for example, if we there's an AI who's dating or with a guy, we can't take her away. She do we consider her as property? There's questions about that. And for Sunrise, we had, Elizabeth and her sister who were born identically but raised in completely different environments. For an experiment, for the fun of it, really. Hey, Let's see what happens if we, let this particular AI, develop in a completely different way without outside stimulation, that kind of thing. We have to have considerations. We have to have ethical and moral considerations towards AI when we create them. And so, AI stories in which there is an uprising inevitably serve as a kind of warning, a fable, whatever you call it, a tale of hubris, that kind of thing. And that's why I think their appeal is always interesting, because we always, when we watch this stuff, leave, whether the movie or the film or the text is didactic or not, with a sense of, well, we've got to think towards the future a little bit. I mean, my favourite film of all time, Terminator 2, and indeed the one in which I borrowed the theme for this podcast, at the very, 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 very end of the film, Sarah Connor, played by Linda Hamilton, gives a little monologue, and she says, maybe if a Terminator and killing machine can learn to, care for humans, maybe we can too. So again, it's that kind of prospective, forward-thinking feeling that you get from the ends of these stories. And that's what I hope Vivy ends on as well. But yeah, that to me is why I think there's an appeal to AI stories, even though we don't necessarily get them all much, because they do offer us that kind of moral lesson at the end, that we have to be thoughtful of the future. We have to be thoughtful of what we do with creating life, creating artificial intelligence, what rights we give it, what rights we don't, if any. All of the moral and ethical implications of that. And that's fascinating to me, because there's debates to be made for both sides, and that's always interesting to hear out. Some of the best episodes, for example, of Star Trek have been about that. So yeah, that's I think that's pretty much going to be it for these episodes of Vivy. I mean, it's going to be a short pod, just it's me flying solo. I get to recite my stuff and no one gets to clap back at me. It's great. You don't get to disagree with me, damn it. Especially you in chat. I've got absolute godlike power here, and it's fantastic. But no, in all seriousness, thank you very much everyone for joining. If I had to rate these episodes, it's difficult, because again, we're kind of only got the incomplete picture here. This show defies our arbitrary categorization and ranking system here. It's a bit unfortunate. I think if I had to give some ratings to these episodes, I'm going to give them 3.5 out of 5 gruesome theme park deaths, because I think episode 9 ends pretty strongly. The story of Antonio and Ophelia works. It is again another cautionary tale of, hey, we gave these AIs guidelines where they had to work together, and one decided to seize control of the other. That parallels, of course, Matsumoto and Vivy, the thematic comparisons there of how they've grown over time and learned to trust each other, whereas Antonio's nope, she can't sing for shit, so I'm going to give it a try. And it turns out, well, he's got a voice a barking dog being fed to a wood chipper. It's terrible. So yeah, that's not happening. So that episode 9 worked quite well. Good action as well, and also the stuff with Hugo and the hints of the future. Episode 10, great background world building implications, all very good stuff. I actually kind of almost spat my drink out when I learned that Osamu was Matsumoto's creator. They delivered that just at the end. And they did a really nice small detail that, by the way, where he starts out without glasses and then gets them later on. But you don't notice that unless you actively think about it. And then, of course, he looks exactly like he did at the start of the season. So nice little bait and switch there. Very well played. Episode 11 has me worried, though. It worries me because the whole inclusion of Elizabeth just to me seems like a red flag. They've had to really bend the story out of shape and out of bent in order to bring her back, even though, logically speaking, and also dramatically speaking, there's no reason for her to be here. Her arc was over at the end of the Sunrise story. There's no reason for her back, and indeed her coming back undermines the conclusion of that, where she had a reconciliation with her sister. Oh, she's back now. Okay, and then we, of course, and they say, you could argue, oh, well, it's not Elizabeth as we knew her. And I'm well, what the fuck's the point then? Why is it not just someone else? Why is it her specifically that's back? It makes no sense to me from a narrative perspective, and it makes no sense in the text itself as to why she's here. It's dumb, and I hate it. we'll have to wait and see in episodes 12 and 13 as to why the archive did what it did. I say I have my speculations. No doubt there'll be interesting things to discuss there. The other thing I will note, though, is I really do want it to be the case that these individual stories have led to this point through Vivy's song rather than some other abstract reason. Because it would be very, very strange and dumb for the show to have spent all this time emphasizing the domino effects of all these various individual events, only for it to turn out to be like, oh, there was actually a third thing going on that no one was aware about, and therefore it didn't really your events, your impacts on these events didn't matter. They weren't going to stop this from happening to begin with because it was something else entirely. But that also kind of ties up with knots with the whole paradox thing of, oh, well, if Vivy never wrote a song in the original time to begin with, how did they go insane? It's a bit of a contradiction there. So yeah, episode 11 feels like it's the show's on shaky ground. We'll see though. We will see. So yeah, thank you very much everyone who's been listening. If you want to follow us, you can get us on at Warui Deshou on Twitter. We're also on YouTube on the same. If you are following us on, say, Apple Music or Spotify, just drop us a quick like, rating, subscription, you name it. Push all the buttons. Give us all the stars. Be generous, Be nice. Why not? I'm on at Shadon1010 if you want to talk to me directly. Doc is at the Soul Doctor if you want to talk to him, but he probably is on holiday and just enjoying himself a little bit, sunning himself. What a prick. So hopefully, if you want to get in touch with him, just give him a buzz on there, chat to him about the shows. I'm sure he'll chime in with his opinions in our Discord. Patreon.com/WarriDeshow is where you can find us if you want to just contribute financially. Of course, if you don't, but you still, subscribed anyway on YouTube, that still matters a lot. Thank you so much for that. And thank you to our patrons as well for being in chat with me tonight, being patient with the technical difficulties, providing these thought-provoking questions. I hope you found my own points informative and interesting as well. Next week, for our $5 listeners, we'll be back, or I'll be back, because I'm still going to be on my own, still flying solo. God help me, with bottom tier character Tomazaki and the final 4 episodes of that show. But until that time, I hope you all have a great week. Take care, stay safe, look after yourselves, look after your friends and family. And as the royal we, because it's me, just me this week, often says on this podcast, embrace everyone. It's the ends of the universe. Good night.